In the deep south of America, tucked between fields of cotton and long stretches of pine trees, lay a small town where people still left their doors unlocked and waved at neighbors from front porches. Life moved slow here. Sundays were for church, Friday nights for high school football, and gossip spread faster than the summer storms that rolled through the countryside. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business, or at least they thought they did. For years, David and Angela Turner had been considered one of the town's most dependable couples. They lived in a modest two-story house on Maple Street, with white shutters and a swing on the porch that creaked whenever a breeze passed. Neighbors said David was the kind of man you could trust with your car, your children, or your deepest secret. He worked long hours as a machine repairman at the local factory, his hands calloused, his shirt always stained with grease, but his heart steady and loyal. Angela, on the other hand, carried herself with a quiet intensity. She was striking, dark hair always pinned back neatly, eyes that seemed to hold secrets no one else could touch. She worked part-time at the library, though she was more often remembered for her fiery spirit than her soft-spoken presence among the bookshelves. Folks admired her devotion to family, especially to her younger sister, Melissa. To outsiders, Angela seemed like the type of woman who would do anything for the people she loved. That was true, but as time would prove, anything can become a dangerous word. Melissa was the shadow that lingered over Angela's life. She was 6 years younger, pretty in a fragile way, with a history of broken relationships and a womb that refused to carry life. Melissa had tried for years, doctors, treatments, even prayer circles at church, but each attempt ended in heartbreak. In a town where family was everything, where a woman's worth was too often measured by the children she bore, Melissa's inability to conceive was both a private sorrow and a public humiliation. Angela carried that burden as if it were her own. She had raised Melissa after their parents died young, playing the role of sister and mother all at once. Angela's sense of responsibility didn't come out of nowhere. It was born in the quiet tragedy of their childhood. Their parents had died in a car accident when Angela was just 16 and Melissa barely 10. In the weeks that followed, relatives drifted in and out of their small home, offering casseroles and condolences, but no one stayed long enough to fill the void. One night, with Melissa crying in bed beside her, Angela wrapped her arms around the little girl and whispered, "I'll take care of you. I promise. You'll never be alone." The words weren't just comfort. They became a vow etched into her soul. From then on, Angela was more than a sister. She was provider, protector, and guardian. She worked after school to pay bills, helped Melissa with homework, even sewed her dresses for school dances. When boys teased Melissa for her shy ways, Angela marched right up to them and warned them off. "She's mine to protect," she would say, her voice sharp enough to silence them. The years cemented that bond, but also a dangerous imbalance. Every failure Melissa faced, Angela treated as her own. Every heartbreak, every disappointment, Angela absorbed until it became a wound in her own heart. When Melissa's marriages failed and doctors told her she might never carry a child, Angela felt the old vow tug at her again. She remembered the promise in that dark bedroom so many years ago, the night she swore to make sure Melissa would never be alone, never broken. And so, in Angela's mind, helping her sister have a child wasn't just compassion. It was destiny. It was her lifelong promise taking its most extreme form. To her, saying no wasn't an option. To her, David's refusal wasn't simply disagreement. It was betrayal of the vow she had built her life around. Every stumble Melissa made in life, Angela had tried to fix. Every heartbreak, Angela had tried to soften. When Melissa cried late at night about being less of a woman, Angela's jaw would tighten, her mind already racing with ways to shield her sister from the world's judgment. David admired Angela's loyalty to her sister, but he didn't always understand it. "You can't fight all of her battles," he'd tell his wife. pulling her clothes at night after Melissa had left their house in tears. She has to find her own way. Angela would stare into the dark and whisper, "She's my blood, David. I won't let her be destroyed by this town." At first, those words sounded like the kind of vow a protective sister might make. But over time, they hardened into something else, a conviction, an obsession. The Turners' marriage, at least on the surface, was solid. They attended Sunday services together, hosted barbecues in their backyard, and were often seen walking hand in hand at the town fair. But underneath the polite smiles and neighborly waves, a quiet storm was brewing. Angela's fixation on her sister's pain grew sharper with each passing year. She felt it like a wound that wouldn't heal. In her eyes, the only way Melissa could ever be whole again was to have a child that carried their family's bloodline, proof that fate had not robbed them completely. And in Angela's mind, there was only one person she trusted to make that happen, her own husband. David, of course, had no idea of the thoughts building in his wife's mind. He came home each evening tired but content, grateful for the warm meals Angela prepared, for the laughter they sometimes still shared. He believed in the simple, unshakable things: honesty, loyalty, faith. To him, marriage was a promise sealed not just in church vows, but in the daily acts of love. Paying the bills, fixing the porch swing, holding his wife when her worries seemed too heavy. But Angela's eyes lingered too long on her sister's despair. Nights when Melissa visited, David noticed the way Angela's voice turned sharp, as if scolding fate itself. "She deserves more," Angela would say after Melissa left, pacing the living room with restless hands. "She deserves what every woman has." David would try to calm her. "Life isn't fair, Angela. But that doesn't mean we can play God." She would stop, look at him with eyes burning with determination, and reply, "If God won't give her a child, maybe we can." In that moment, David would laugh uneasily, assuming his wife was speaking out of frustration. But deep down, something about the way she said it made him uneasy. The Turner story began like many tragedies do, in a quiet town, with ordinary people who seemed anything but dangerous. Neighbors saw a devoted wife, a hard-working husband, and a sister forever in need of saving. No one suspected that behind the shutters of the White House on Maple Street, a seed of obsession was being planted, one that would grow roots too deep to pull out. What no one could know then was how far Angela would go to protect her sister from a lifetime of sorrow. No one could imagine the line she was willing to cross. And no one, least of all David, could predict that the love he thought was unshakable would one day be tested in the most terrifying way. The rain had just begun to tap against the windows of the Turner house when Angela finally let the words slip from her lips. For weeks, they had burned inside her like a secret too heavy to carry, a storm pressing against the walls of her mind. Now, as David sat in his worn recliner reading the evening paper, Angela stood across from him, arms crossed, heart pounding with the kind of certainty only obsession can create. "David," she began, her voice low but trembling, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to take it seriously." David lowered the paper, studying her face. He could see the tension in her eyes, the way her jaw was set, the way her hands fidgeted though she tried to still them. "All right," he said gently. "What's on your mind?" Angela took a deep breath, and for a moment she almost faltered. Almost. But then the image of Melissa, her baby sister with tears streaming down her cheeks, whispering about the emptiness of her womb, flashed through her mind, and her resolve hardened. "It's about Melissa," she said, her voice sharp with determination. David frowned, folding the paper onto his lap. "Angela, we've talked about this. I know she's hurting, but you can't carry her pain like it's your own. It's not healthy." "No, you don't understand." Angela stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "She can't have a child, David. She's been robbed of that chance, and it's destroying her. But we can fix it." "Fix it?" His brows knitted together in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Angela leaned forward, her voice dropping into an urgent whisper. I want you to give her a child. I want you to be the father. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the steady tick of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. David blinked, certain he must have misheard. He searched her face for some hint of a joke, a cruel attempt at dark humor. But Angela's expression was dead serious. Angela, he said slowly, his voice tight. Please tell me you don't mean what I think you just said. I mean it, she snapped, her eyes wet with unshed tears. You're the only man I trust. You're strong, you're good, and you carry the blood of this family now. If you father her child, it'll be as if we both gave her what life has denied. She'll finally have a reason to live again. David rose from his chair, so quickly the newspaper slipped to the floor. He stared at her in disbelief, his chest heaving. Do you hear yourself? That's madness. I'm your husband. My vows were to you, and only you. You're asking me to betray everything we've built, everything we promised each other. Angela's voice cracked. It wouldn't be betrayal, it would be a gift. Don't you see? We could save her. We could give her a piece of us, a piece of this family. Isn't that worth something? David shook his head, pacing across the room. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to grasp how the woman he loved could speak words so twisted. No, Angela. 1,000 times no. This isn't about love, it's about obsession. Melissa doesn't need me. She doesn't need us to cross that line. She needs to find her own way, her own healing. For God's sake, what you're asking, it's wrong. Angela's face hardened. Wrong? What's wrong is letting my sister waste away in sorrow while we sit here pretending everything is fine. What's wrong is a man who won't lift a finger to help the family he swore to protect. David spun around, his voice booming with anger he rarely let out. Don't you dare twist this into some noble act. You're asking me to crawl into bed with your sister. You're asking me to destroy my marriage in the name of a lie. That's not family, Angela. That's betrayal. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to tremble under the weight of their words. The rain outside grew heavier, rattling against the windows as if echoing the storm brewing between them. Angela's lips quivered, her eyes narrowing into a glare. If you loved me, truly loved me, you'd do this. You'd see that I'm not asking for myself, but for her. For us. David stepped closer, his voice now low and trembling with both fury and hurt. Angela, don't ever question my love for you. I've given you everything I have, every ounce of my strength, every day of my life. But this isn't love. This is you losing yourself in something that will ruin us all. And I won't be part of it. Her breath hitched, a sob breaking free as she looked away. For the first time, Angela felt the wall between them solidify into something unmovable. She had thought David would understand, that his loyalty to her would bend to the will of her conviction. Instead, she found herself staring into the eyes of a man who would never cross that line, no matter how desperate her plea. Melissa's name hung unspoken between them, the silent third party in their crumbling marriage. David, shaking his head, finally grabbed his coat from the rack. I need air, he muttered, his voice heavy with disappointment. I can't stand here and listen to this anymore. The screen door slammed behind him, leaving Angela alone in the dim light of their living room. She collapsed onto the couch, her hands clutching at the fabric, tears streaming down her face. In her mind, David's refusal wasn't just a rejection of her request. It was a rejection of her family, of everything she believed she was fighting for. Outside, the rain poured down in sheets, flooding the gutters, soaking the earth. Inside, Angela's heart hardened. What had begun as a desperate plea was now turning into something else entirely. A conviction that if David wouldn't do what was necessary, then he didn't truly stand beside her. And that thought, poisonous and unrelenting, began to take root in her soul. She whispered into the silence, her voice trembling but certain. If he won't save her, then maybe he doesn't deserve me at all. The days after Angela's request hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. David returned home each evening, but the warmth that once filled their house seemed to have vanished. Meals were quieter, laughter absent, and even the smallest exchanges felt strained. The love that had once been their anchor was now a battlefield where silence carried sharper edges than words. Angela moved through the house with a restless energy, her footsteps heavy, her glances cold. She didn't forget David's refusal. She couldn't. Each time she saw her sister Melissa's weary smile. Each time she watched her fight back tears when another neighbor announced a pregnancy. Angela's resentment toward her husband deepened. To her, David's steadfast no had become an indictment, a sign that he cared nothing for her sister's pain or for the bloodline Angela held sacred. David, meanwhile, felt like he was living with a stranger. His wife's eyes had taken on a hardness he couldn't soften. He tried, at first, to bridge the distance. He'd sit beside her on the porch swing in the evenings, pointing out how the fireflies lit up the yard like tiny lanterns, hoping to stir a smile. But Angela remained rigid, arms folded, staring into the night. One evening he finally broke the silence. "Angela, this thing you've asked of me, it's tearing us apart. I love you, but I can't be the man you want me to be. Not in this." Her gaze never left the yard. "You love me enough to fix the fence, enough to bring home your paycheck, but not enough to save my sister's life." David turned sharply, hurt flashing in his eyes. "Her life isn't mine to save. You're asking me to destroy what we have, and you don't even see it." Angela stood, her voice rising. "What we have? What do we have, David? A house with no children? A marriage that means nothing to anyone but you? Melissa is family. Family is everything. If you won't understand that, maybe I married the wrong man." The words cut deep, sharper than any knife. David sat frozen, watching his wife storm back inside, the screen door slamming like a final word. As the weeks passed, Angela's obsession grew heavier. She started drinking more, just a glass of wine at first, then another, until her evenings blurred with the dull comfort of alcohol. Melissa noticed, of course, but Angela brushed off her sister's concerns with tight smiles. "Don't worry about me," she'd say, pouring another. "I'm just tired." But Melissa wasn't blind. She saw the way Angela's hands shook, the way her eyes burned with something dangerous. One night, after Angela's third glass, Melissa finally spoke up. "Angela, this isn't you. I never asked for this. I never wanted you to sacrifice your marriage for me." Angela's head snapped up, her tone sharp. "Don't say that. You deserve a child. You deserve to be whole." Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "At what cost, Angela? At yours? At David's? I can't live with that." But Angela only shook her head, unwilling to hear. In her mind, Melissa's protests were nothing more than the cries of a woman too beaten down by life to know what she truly needed. Angela believed she knew better. David tried to confide in Pastor Reynolds, their minister at the Baptist church. One late afternoon, after helping fix a loose gutter on the church roof, he sat with the pastor on the wooden steps out front, his voice low and strained. "She's not the same," David admitted. "It's like something's taken hold of her. She keeps talking about bloodlines, about saving her sister. I've tried to reason with her, but it's like talking to a wall." The pastor sighed, patting David's shoulder. "Marriage is tested in ways we never expect, son, but you stand firm in your vows. Don't let madness drag you down with it." David nodded, but inside, he felt more alone than ever. He wanted to save Angela from herself, but every attempt only seemed to push her further away. The tension finally boiled over one Saturday night. David came home late from a double shift at the factory, his clothes heavy with oil, his eyes weary. Angela was waiting in the living room, a half-empty bottle of wine on the table beside her. "You weren't home for dinner," she said coldly. "I had to work late," David replied, setting his keys down. "I called." "You called," she repeated mockingly. Always an excuse. Always something more important than this family. David's patience snapped. "Family? Angela, you keep using that word like it's a weapon. You mean Melissa." That's all this is about. You don't even see me anymore. I'm not a husband to you. I'm just a tool for your obsession." Angela's face flushed red. She rose, pointing a trembling finger at him. "Don't you dare call my love for my sister an obsession. You think you're righteous, but you're a coward. You hide behind vows while she suffers. What kind of man does that?" David stepped closer, his voice a thunderous whisper. "A man who knows right from wrong. A man who won't betray his wife's trust, even when she's begging him to." For a long moment, their eyes locked, two storms colliding with no hope of calm. Then Angela shoved past him, retreating to the kitchen. David stood there in the living room, breathing hard, his heart aching with the realization that the woman he loved was slipping beyond his reach. From that night on, their marriage was fractured beyond repair. David slept in the spare room more often, his back turned to the door. Angela spent her nights pacing, whispering to herself, staring out the window, as if searching for answers in the dark. Neighbors noticed the change. Mrs. Howard from across the street told her bridge club that she'd seen Angela yelling on the porch while David walked away, shoulders slumped. Whispers began to circle, as they always did in small towns. The Turners were in trouble. Inside the house, the air was thick with unspoken words. Love had not vanished, but it had curdled into resentment, each day harder than the last. Angela felt abandoned, betrayed by the one man she thought would follow her anywhere. David felt trapped, watching helplessly as the woman he'd vowed to protect slipped further into shadows he could not chase away. And yet, neither could bring themselves to leave. Perhaps it was pride, or fear of scandal, or some small ember of hope buried beneath the ashes. Whatever the reason, they remained bound together, two people tethered by vows that no longer brought comfort but only sharpened their pain. What neither of them knew then was that their marriage was no longer simply strained. It was teetering on the edge of something irreversible. The line between love and destruction had thinned, and soon, one stormy night, it would snap entirely. The night it happened, the sky was restless. Dark clouds gathered over the small town like a warning, and the wind rattled the shutters of the Turner house. The air carried the heavy scent of rain, thick and electric, as if the world itself knew something terrible was about to unfold. David came home late, the factory shift dragging longer than he'd planned. His boots were soaked from the first drops of rain that had started to fall. He entered the house quietly, hoping maybe Angela had gone to bed. But the moment he opened the door, he knew she was waiting. The living room lights were on, the curtains drawn tight, and Angela sat on the couch with a glass of whiskey in her hand. Melissa was there too, perched nervously in the armchair by the window, her face pale. She clutched her purse like she was ready to leave at any second. David froze, the weight of exhaustion on his shoulders. "What's going on?" he asked cautiously. Angela's eyes flicked toward him, cold and sharp. "We're having a family talk." Melissa shook her head quickly. "Angela, please, this isn't the time. I should go." "No." Angela snapped, her voice slicing through the air. "You're staying. You need to hear this." David's jaw tightened. He hung his coat on the rack, never breaking eye contact with his wife. "I'm not doing this tonight. Not again." But Angela was already rising to her feet, pacing like a predator trapped in a cage. "You don't get to decide that. Not anymore. I've begged you, pleaded with you, and all you've done is shut me down. You've left me with no choice but to make you understand." Melissa stood, her hands trembling. "Angela, stop. Please. You're scaring me." Angela whirled on her sister, her voice cracking. "I'm scaring you? Do you have any idea what it's like to watch you cry yourself to sleep every night? To see you look at other women's children like they're holding the very thing God denied you? You're my sister, my blood." And she jabbed a finger toward David. "He could fix it with one act of compassion, but he won't. He won't, because he's selfish." David's voice boomed over the storm outside. "That's enough." He stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and grief. "Angela, I love you. But this obsession is destroying you. I will not betray our vows. Not for you, not for her, not for anyone. And the more you push, the further you're driving us apart." Angela's chest heaved, her eyes wild with rage and desperation. "Then what am I supposed to do, David? Just sit back and watch my sister rot in sorrow? Pretend everything's fine while she wastes away?" "Yes," David shot back, his voice breaking. "Yes, if that's what life dealt her. Because sometimes we don't get what we want. Sometimes we suffer. But you don't burn your house down just because the lights went out." Melissa began to cry, burying her face in her hands. "Please, stop. Both of you. This isn't worth it." But Angela couldn't hear her. The storm inside was louder than the thunder rolling across the sky. She stumbled toward the cabinet near the hallway, yanking open the drawer where David kept his old revolver. The sight of it made Melissa scream. "Angela, no." David's heart dropped into his stomach. "Angela, put it down. Right now." Her hands trembled as she held the gun, but her eyes never wavered. "You don't get it, do you? I can't let you stand in the way anymore. You're the obstacle, David. You're the reason my sister will never know what it's like to hold her own child." David raised his hand slowly, his voice steady but desperate. "Listen to me. I am not your enemy. I am your husband. We built a life together. We survived things other couples couldn't. And you're willing to throw it all away for a fantasy? For something that was never meant to be?" Angela's breath came in ragged gasps, tears spilling down her cheeks. For a split second, doubt flickered across her face. But then she looked at Melissa, frail, broken, hopeless, and the flicker hardened into resolve. Melissa cried out again, rushing forward. "Angela, stop. I don't want this. Don't you understand? I never wanted this." Angela's hand shook violently. "You deserve it, Melissa. You deserve everything. And if he won't give it to you, then he doesn't deserve to breathe." David took a cautious step forward, his voice low. "Angela, if you do this, there's no going back. You'll lose me forever. You'll lose yourself." The storm outside cracked open with a bolt of lightning, the thunder rattling the very walls. And then, the gun fired. The sound was deafening, louder than any storm, louder than Melissa's scream as she collapsed to the floor beside her brother-in-law. David staggered backward, his eyes wide with shock, a crimson bloom spreading across his chest. He tried to speak, to call out her name, but the words caught in his throat. His knees buckled, and he crumpled onto the carpet, the life draining from him in seconds. Angela stood frozen, the revolver slipping from her hand and clattering to the floor. Her chest rose and fell violently, her mind struggling to grasp the reality of what she had done. Melissa's sobs tore through the house. Oh God, David!" She pressed her hands against the wound, but it was useless. The blood seeped through her fingers, warm and unstoppable. "Why, Angela? Why? I never wanted this." Angela collapsed onto the couch, her body trembling. Her eyes stared blankly at the lifeless form of her husband. "He left me no choice," she whispered, her voice hollow. "He chose himself over us. Over you." Melissa turned on her sister, grief twisting into fury. "No, Angela. You chose. You chose your obsession over love. You killed the only man who ever cared for us both. And nothing will ever fix that." The rain hammered against the windows, the thunder rolling like drums of judgment. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with every second. Melissa, with bloodstained hands, reached for the phone and dialed 911, her voice broken as she begged for help that was already too late. Angela sat in silence, rocking slightly, her whispers drowned out by the storm. "I did it for us. For family. For love." But no one was listening anymore. By the time the police arrived, the storm had passed. The air outside was still, heavy with the smell of rain and gunpowder. Inside, a family lay in ruins, a husband dead, a sister shattered, and a wife whose love had twisted into something unrecognizable. The officers found Angela sitting calmly on the couch, staring at her bloodstained hands. She looked up at them with vacant eyes and said softly, "He wouldn't give her a child, so I took him away." They handcuffed her gently, leading her out past the flashing lights. Neighbors gathered on porches, whispering in disbelief as the once proud woman was driven away into the night. Melissa remained inside, kneeling beside David's body, her sobs echoing through the hollow rooms of the Turner house. She wept not only for her brother-in-law, but for the sister she had lost long before the gun ever fired. The storm had ended, but its destruction would linger forever. The storm had passed, but the Turner house felt colder than any rain could make it. Police tape stretched across the front porch, fluttering in the damp wind, while red and blue lights painted the quiet street in somber flashes. Neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering in disbelief, their voices carrying the same refrain. It couldn't be true. Inside, the living room was frozen in tragedy. David's body lay beneath a white sheet, the carpet beneath him still dark and wet. Officers moved carefully, photographing the scene, marking evidence. Every footstep echoed with the weight of a family's collapse. Angela sat on the couch, wrists bound in cuffs, her eyes hollow. She didn't resist when they led her away. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She moved as though her body was separate from her soul, like she'd left herself behind in the moment she pulled the trigger. Melissa remained on the floor long after the sheet was pulled over David. Her hands were still stained with his blood, trembling as she rocked back and forth. A young officer tried to help her stand, but she pushed him away. Her voice was raw with grief. "You don't understand," she cried. "He was the only good man we had, and now he's gone because of me." The officer exchanged a look with his partner, but neither knew how to answer. At the station, Angela sat under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights, facing Detective Harris. He was a seasoned investigator with weary eyes, the kind of man who had seen too many homes torn apart by violence. Still, there was something about Angela that unsettled him. Her calmness was unnatural, almost chilling. "Mrs. Turner," Harris began, his voice steady, "I need to understand what happened tonight. Why did you shoot your husband?" Angela stared at the table between them, her hands resting still in her lap. For a moment, it seemed she wouldn't answer. Then her voice came, soft and eerily certain. "He refused," she whispered. Harris leaned forward. "Refused what?" She lifted her eyes, and for the first time, there was fire in them. "To save my sister. To give her the one thing she's always needed. I begged him. I pleaded. And he turned his back on us. On family." Harris sat back, running a hand over his face. He'd heard confessions born of rage, of jealousy, of money. But this twisted logic of love and bloodlines, was something else entirely. "Mrs. Turner," he said slowly, "your husband didn't deserve to die for saying no. That's not how family works. That's not love." Angela's lips trembled. "You don't understand. No one does. He left me no choice." Harris didn't argue. He just scribbled in his notebook, though in his mind, the case was clear. Meanwhile, Melissa was taken to the hospital for shock. Her clothes were stained, her body trembling uncontrollably. Nurses wrapped her in blankets, but nothing could warm the guilt that gnawed at her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw David's face, the shock, the pain, the love that still lingered in his eyes even as his life slipped away. When a counselor gently asked if she wanted to talk, Melissa broke down. "It's my fault. She did it for me. I never wanted it, but she did it because of me. I'll carry this forever." News of the crime spread quickly through the small town. By morning, everyone knew. Headlines read, "Local woman arrested for husband's murder in family dispute." By sunrise the next day, the tragedy was no longer just a neighborhood whisper. It had become the lead story across the county. The Daily Ledger ran the headline in bold type, "Devoted wife turns killer, family torn apart in shocking shooting." Local radio stations replayed the story every hour, callers phoning in to share their disbelief. At Miller's Diner, The only place in town where the smell of bacon and strong coffee blended with gossip. The case dominated every booth. Farmers on their morning break shook their heads, muttering that David had always been the kind of man who'd give you the shirt off his back. A group of women from the church quilting circle sat huddled in the corner, one of them whispering through tears, "I never thought Angela had that kind of darkness in her." Even the high school kids talked about it between classes, though their tones were more curious than mournful. "Can you believe Mrs. Turner did that?" one boy asked. "She used to read stories to us at the library." The case soon made its way onto the evening news. A stern-faced anchor summarized the events, her words clipped but heavy. Authorities say the motive stemmed from a dispute over family obligations. What appears to have been devotion twisted into violence. Images of the Turner house, draped in yellow tape, flashed on screen. For viewers across the county, it was both a tragedy and a warning. Not everyone agreed on how to view Angela. Some neighbors, remembering her tireless care for Melissa after their parents' deaths, painted her as a woman broken by years of burden. "She gave too much of herself," an elderly neighbor told a reporter. One day, there was nothing left but desperation. Others were less forgiving. "Obsession, plain and simple," snapped a man at the gas station. "Plenty of us have troubles, but we don't go shooting our spouses. She knew what she was doing." The debate spread beyond the town. Letters to the editor filled the local paper, some sympathetic, some furious. A pastor from a nearby county even wrote that the case was an example of what happens when family loyalty is exalted above God's law. Melissa, hearing these voices, felt the weight of every word. She couldn't escape it. When she walked down Main Street, she caught the stares, some pitying, some judging. She was both victim and unwilling centerpiece of a scandal. At night, lying awake, she whispered apologies to David, but also to her sister, who sat alone in a jail cell. For the town, the case became more than just a crime. It was a mirror. People began asking themselves, how far would they go for family? Where was the line between love and obsession? Church ladies whispered over their morning coffee, shaking their heads. Men at the diner muttered about how they'd never seen it coming. "She always seemed so devoted," Mrs. Howard said, clutching her pearls. "Always talking about family. I suppose none of us knew how far she'd go." Pastor Reynolds stood before his congregation the following Sunday, the pews packed with faces full of sorrow and disbelief. His sermon trembled as he spoke. "We are reminded this week," he said, "that when love becomes twisted by obsession, it can destroy the very lives it seeks to protect. Let us pray for the soul of David Turner, a man of loyalty and honor. And let us pray, too, for his wife, that she may find repentance in the darkness she has created." Back at the Turner house, the evidence team finished their work. The home, once a place of Sunday dinners and family gatherings, now bore the stain of tragedy. The neighbors who peeked through curtains said the house felt haunted, as if the storm had left a mark that would never wash away. Melissa refused to go back inside. She stayed with a friend, unable to bear the sight of the porch, the swing, the windows glowing in the night. To her, it was no longer home, it was a tomb. Weeks later, during the preliminary hearing, Melissa sat in the courtroom, her face drawn with grief. She had been subpoenaed to testify, and the thought made her stomach turn. How could she speak against her own sister? But how could she remain silent when David's voice was gone forever? When Angela entered the courtroom, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, their eyes met. For a moment, the sisters were children again, bound by blood, by love. But then reality returned. Angela's gaze was cold, as if she still believed she had done the right thing. Melissa broke down on the stand. "I never wanted her to do it," she told the court, tears streaming down her face. "I never asked her to sacrifice him. She thought she was saving me, but she destroyed us all." The gallery sat in silence, every word cutting like glass. Detective Harris gave his testimony plainly. This was not a crime of passion in the usual sense. he told the court. This was a crime born of obsession. Mrs. Turner believed she was acting out of love, but in the end, it was selfishness disguised as sacrifice. The jury listened, their faces grim. Angela herself remained mostly silent, though when asked directly by the judge if she regretted her actions, she whispered, "I regret that David couldn't see why it had to be done." Her words sent a shiver through the room. As the proceedings stretched on, the town grew weary of the tragedy, but the wound remained raw. David's funeral had been held under clear skies, the church overflowing with mourners. Men who had worked beside him at the factory carried his coffin, their heads bowed. Melissa stood at the graveside, clutching a single rose, whispering apologies into the earth. Angela was not allowed to attend. She sat alone in her cell that day, staring at the concrete walls, listening to the distant echoes of hymns she would never sing again. The investigation concluded with a chilling clarity. Angela Turner had killed her husband not out of sudden rage, but out of a distorted conviction that she was protecting her family. The law would call it murder. To Angela, it was sacrifice. To Melissa, it was betrayal. And to the small town where everyone thought they knew the Turners, it was proof that even in the most ordinary of homes, darkness can take root and grow unchecked until it consumes everything. The courthouse was an old brick building that had stood for over a century, its halls echoing with stories of thefts, disputes, and the occasional scandal. But never had it seen a case that gripped the town the way the Turner trial did. The murder of David Turner wasn't just another crime. It was the unraveling of a family everyone thought they knew. On the first day of the trial, the benches were packed. Reporters scribbled in notepads, townsfolk craned their necks, and whispers rippled through the room as Angela was led in wearing her prison-issued uniform. Her dark hair was neatly tied back, her posture stiff, her face pale but composed. She looked more like a woman attending Sunday service than one standing accused of murder. Melissa sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her body trembling as if every breath took effort. She could hardly bring herself to look at her sister, yet she couldn't look away either. The bond of blood held them together, even as the gulf between them grew wider than ever. The prosecutor wasted no time setting the stage. He stood tall, his voice commanding, as he addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about a woman driven to protect her family. It is about a woman who let obsession twist her sense of love into something deadly." David Turner said no. He had every right to say no, and for that, he paid with his life. The defense attorney painted a different picture, one of a woman overwhelmed by grief and desperation. "Angela Turner is not a monster," he insisted. "She is a sister who loved too much, who carried the burdens of others until she broke beneath them. This was not murder in cold blood. This was the tragic act of a woman whose mind and heart were pushed beyond their limits." The courtroom was silent as the first witnesses were called. Detective Harris testified calmly, describing the crime scene in detail, the revolver on the floor, David's body, Angela's chilling words. He wouldn't give her a child. "So I took him away." Gasps filled the room, though many had already read the statement in the papers. Hearing it aloud from a seasoned detective made it all the more chilling. Then came Melissa. She walked to the stand with unsteady legs, her eyes glistening. The oath felt heavy on her lips, as though swearing to tell the truth meant betraying the last pieces of family she had left. "Miss Turner," the prosecutor said gently, "did you ever ask your sister to kill David?" Melissa shook her head, her voice breaking. "Never. I begged her to stop. I told her I didn't want this. But she wouldn't listen." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she continued. "David was kind to me. He treated me like family even when I felt like a failure. He didn't deserve this. None of us did." Her words hung in the air, each syllable cutting deeper than any evidence could. Jurors shifted in their seats, some wiping at their eyes. Angela sat motionless, staring at her sister with an expression no one could read. Was it sorrow? Anger? Regret? Or simply the hollow emptiness of a woman who had lost everything? When it came time for Angela to speak, the courtroom leaned in. Her attorney urged her to show remorse, to plead for mercy. But Angela's voice carried a stubborn conviction that unsettled everyone. "I loved my husband," she said, her eyes sweeping across the jury. "But he didn't love me enough to do what was right. Family is everything. My sister was dying inside, and he could have saved her. He chose pride over compassion. I only did what I had to." The prosecutor pounced on her words. "What you had to? Mrs. Turner, are you saying you believe you were justified in killing your husband?" Angela's chin lifted slightly. "I believe he forced my hand." A murmur spread through the gallery. The prosecutor let the silence linger before he turned to the jury. "And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all you need to know." Deliberations lasted only a day. The jury returned, solemn-faced, their verdict echoing through the chamber. Guilty of first-degree murder. Angela stood as the judge read the sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes, as though she had expected nothing less. Melissa wept openly, her sobs filling the courtroom. She wasn't weeping for justice, nor even for David, though her grief for him was endless. She wept for her sister, for the life destroyed by obsession, for the family that no longer existed. As Angela was led away in chains, their eyes met one final time. For the briefest moment, Angela's hard mask cracked, and the faintest shadow of regret flickered across her face. But then she was gone, swallowed by the system, her footsteps echoing down the hallway until they disappeared. Life in the small town slowly moved forward, as life always does. The Turner house was sold, its windows shuttered, its porch swing taken down. People passed by and spoke in hushed tones, unwilling to forget but unsure how to move on. David's grave became a quiet place of pilgrimage. Melissa visited often, laying fresh flowers and speaking softly into the wind. "I'm sorry," she would whisper. "I'm so sorry." But Melissa's grief did not end at the graveside. It followed her everywhere, into the grocery store aisles, where she avoided familiar faces, into the quiet of her bedroom, where silence pressed down like a weight, into her dreams, where David's eyes stared at her, not in anger, but in a sorrow she could never erase. She stopped attending church for a time, unable to bear the stares, the whispered prayers offered on her behalf. Even the hymns felt like accusations, each word reminding her that she was the reason her sister had pulled the trigger. At night, Melissa often woke drenched in sweat, hearing the gunshot again, feeling the warmth of David's blood on her hands. She would stumble to the bathroom sink, scrubbing her skin raw even though the stain had long since faded. "It's still there," she whispered to her reflection. "It'll always be there." Some nights, despair pulled her toward darker thoughts. She wondered if it would be easier to slip away, to end the weight she carried. But then she thought of David, of how he had once told her, "You deserve to live, Melissa, no matter what anyone says." It was his voice, remembered in fragments, that kept her alive. Slowly, painfully, she began to write letters to him. Pages of apologies, confessions, and prayers she folded neatly and placed at his grave. "I couldn't stop her," one letter read. "I should have tried harder. I should have screamed louder. But I froze. And now I live with that silence." The townsfolk who once whispered about her began to notice her quiet resilience. She took small steps, helping at the library where Angela used to work, volunteering at the church food drive when she could manage the courage to face the congregation again. Yet beneath it all, the ache never left. For Melissa, there would never be true peace. She had lost a brother-in-law she respected, a sister she loved, and a sense of self she would never regain. Her life became a balancing act between survival and sorrow, between remembering and trying, somehow, to forgive herself. And every time she stood before David's grave, She repeated the words she believed she would whisper until her last breath. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Angela, behind bars, lived out her days in silence. She never wrote letters, never asked for visitors. Some said she still believed she had done the right thing. Others thought she finally understood the weight of her choices. No one could be sure. For the town, the lesson was bitter but clear. Love, when twisted into obsession, becomes something else entirely. Something dangerous, something capable of tearing lives apart. David Turner had been a man of simple faith and loyalty, and in the end, he paid the price for saying no to a request no man should ever have been asked to grant. And for Melissa, the tragedy was a wound that would never fully heal. She had lost a brother-in-law, a sister, and any sense of home she had left. The echoes of that stormy night would follow her forever, a reminder of how love, unchecked, can turn into the deadliest force of all. The Turner story faded from the headlines eventually, replaced by newer scandals and fresher tragedies. But for those who lived it, for those who sat in that courtroom and heard the words spoken, it remained unforgettable, a chilling testament to what happens when devotion crosses the line into destruction. Years later, reminders of the Turner tragedy still lingered in quiet corners of the town. The White House on Maple Street stood empty for a long while, its paint peeling, its shutters sagging. The porch swing where David and Angela once sat side by side had been taken down, but the rusted chains still dangled, swaying in the wind like a ghost of the life they had shared. Children passing by hurried their steps, whispering that the place was haunted, not by spirits, but by memories too heavy to name. On rainy nights, neighbors swore they could still hear echoes of shouting from inside, though they knew it was only the storm rattling loose boards. The house, abandoned and silent, became a landmark of warning. Folks pointed it out to visitors with hushed tones. That's where love turned into something else. That's where everything went wrong. At the cemetery, David's grave never lacked fresh flowers. Some came from Melissa, who still knelt there weekly, pressing folded letters into the earth. Others were left by factory workers who had known his quiet generosity, or by townsfolk who felt compelled to honor a man taken too soon. The stone itself bore simple words: a faithful husband, a man of honor. Sometimes, the wind sweeping through the graveyard caught Melissa's hair and made her shiver, as if David himself was near. She whispered into the breeze, "I'm trying, David. I'm trying to live the way you'd want me to." As for Angela, prison walls swallowed her story. No one really knew if she still clung to the belief that she had acted out of love, or if the silence of her cell finally forced her to face the truth. Her name became a cautionary tale mothers whispered to their daughters. Don't let your love consume you. Don't lose yourself trying to save someone else. The Turner tragedy was no longer in the papers, but it lived on in symbols. The empty porch, the overgrown yard, the fresh roses on a grave, and the silence of a sister who bore the weight of both love and ruin. And in that silence, the town carried a lasting reminder that devotion, when twisted by obsession, does not heal, it destroys.